Welcome back. Oh, a great show, including next hour. We're going to tell you exactly where, I guarantee there's mold in your house. We're going to tell you where it is.
Let's not talk about that yet. It's too early.
No, there's
no one wants that conversation.
There's mold, and you better
for 2 hours.
You got to listen because we're going to tell you where it is. But before we do that, Ann Casey joins us with Miller Laine Properties, and she's got a great commitment to the needs of her clients over the last 4 years, and really works with REOs, real estate owned by bank, and with 32 different banks. So there's a little priority access that she actually gives her clients, which is different than a lot of other typical real estate agents. Well, welcome, Ann. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. So I'll let you tell why we had to change a little bit of your introduction today.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am actually just joining Miller Laine Properties. They represent bank-owned properties on the east side and work with 32 different lending institutions.
So, you ended up in a position now with a company that, really speaks to what you have become an expert in. And there's not a lot of REO agents out there that just work with buyers or a lot with buyers.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of pitfalls that people will fall into if they don't know how to navigate buyer representation on REO properties.
So, okay, first we're going to probably say REO about 500 times over the next 10 minutes. So why don't we just clear the air and talk about I just want you to explain exactly what an REO property is.
REOs are bank-owned properties. Those are properties that have already gone through the foreclosure auction process and have returned to the bank because they weren't bought at auction.
So now the bank owns them and they don't want them.
Exactly.
And so they're trying to find somebody to buy them and love them and move into them or maybe just turn them into investment, I suppose.
Either way, they tend to be some of the best deals on the market.
So are there still great bank-owned deals out there?
Absolutely. So far, year to date in King County alone, 32% of the homes that have sold have been bank-owned.
32%. So the banks are unloading some of their houses, it sounds like.
Absolutely. We don't have as much inventory right now as we typically do on the market, but there is a lot of bank-owned inventory.
So why do people, I think there's, between bank-owned, or REOs, and short sales, there's this maybe misconception on what's going to happen if they make an offer. Can you maybe differentiate or help us understand why REOs are different than a short sale, not necessarily from the seller side, but when you're out looking to buy one?
Absolutely. So on short sales, the property is still owned by the homeowner, but they're selling the property for less than they owe on it. So they're selling it for short of what they owe. A lot of people think that means that it's going to sell quickly or that the process is short. It's actually quite the opposite. And short sales, typically, to go through a full approval process, can take 3 to 6 months to close. Bank-owned properties, or REOs, are owned outright from the bank. So they are much, much easier in the offer and closing process because you're only dealing with the seller,
which is the bank. So it almost skips the middleman of the seller to go through the bank, and at this point in time, the bank just has full rights and to do whatever they want. So when you think about, you said there's good deals out there.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the good deals. I mean, you talk maybe like the average sales price, or how do you know there are good deals?
So typically, we kind of think that banks put properties on the market around 15% under market value. You know, we can look at numbers as far as what the median sale price has been in King County, which was around 3.25 year to date, and the median sales price for bank-owned properties in King County was about $100,000 less than that. That number's a little bit skewed as far as real market value because obviously bank-owned properties don't include new construction and those kinds of things typically. But, you know, as a rule of thumb, they are better deals and they move fairly quickly if they're in good condition.
And are they usually in good condition?
More and more we're seeing bank-owned properties that are. Before, when foreclosures were sort of few and far between, a lot of the properties were pretty worn. But now, unfortunately, as foreclosures have become more and more common, we're seeing a wider variety of the types of properties that are bank-owned and the condition.
So it's house shopping. It's not, hey, we're just going to go look at bank-owned properties and find the perfect one.
Absolutely. I mean, ultimately, if somebody wants, you know, their dream home in the school district of their choice, they're going to look at everything, whether it's bank-owned, short sale, resale, new construction. They're looking for a home. But if they can get a great deal, or if they're investors who are specifically looking for that, bank-owned properties are an option.
When people go and they're looking at houses, and this is just your average buyer, do you feel like they have a stigma against or for bank-owned properties when you're talking with them, or does it just depend?
I don't know. Typically, I've found with a lot of my clients, when they start looking at bank-owned properties, they've heard a lot of things about getting great deals, and so they want to go in and lowball these properties that are already priced under value. Right now, with our inventory levels, we're seeing a lot of things go multiple offer. So I think that from that standpoint, everybody thinks that they should just throw in all these crazy low offers, which right now isn't always the best approach when you're already looking at a discounted property.
So there's not a lot of these similar to the other houses on the market. I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any houses on the market from what we talk about here.
I know. Right now, we're at a really low inventory point. In fact, we were at 25,668 homes on the market in July of 2010. Right now, we're at the lowest inventory level seen at 13,181 homes on market. So we are down quite a ways.
Well, it's almost half.
Exactly.
So how many of those, or what percentage of those are bank owned? Do you know?
I don't know the exact percentage.
Well,
I know that, like
day.
I said, about 32% of the sold properties have been bank owned. So
they are selling, and maybe because they have that slightly lower price. When people are out looking at them, what are some things they really should look at? What are some big sticking points? If somebody without you, of course, was going into a property that was bank owned and they're looking at it to move into, what are some big sticking points that you would recommend them thinking about?
Well, obviously, because most bank owned properties are sold as is, condition is key. Getting that inspection is key. One thing to think about when you buy a bank-owned property is that typically if you're buying a resale that's, say, on septic, having a septic inspection and pumping done is the responsibility of the seller. With a bank-owned property, that cost is also on the shoulders of the buyer, as well as, any possible repairs, because it's unlikely that the banks will make any repairs or concessions. So
there's a little bit more, maybe you got a stomach.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
no pun intended towards a septic tank, but, but there's just more you have to think about, or stomach, or just, ultimately maybe be able to pay for.
Yeah. I mean, that's obviously why with any home, you'd want to get a qualified home inspector to take a look at it. But it's especially important with bank-owned properties because ultimately you're not going to be able to go back and ask the seller to make those repairs for you.
That cannot ever happen?
No, not across the board can't ever happen. If it's something where it's going to restrict the saleability of the property in the future.
Such as maybe an FHA purchase and the roof's leaking or something along those lines. It's like an unlivable property.
Yeah, they will sometimes go ahead and make repairs based on those kinds of items. It's fairly rare that they'll make routine repairs.
So leaky faucets, sorry guys, fix it.
Exactly.
That doesn't help for the leaky faucet houses.
No, it doesn't. But, if you're getting a good discount on it, you could probably hire someone to fix your faucet.
I hope so. Well, tell me a little bit about the process though, because if you can't go through kind of this typical inspection period, most people, you buy your house and you have this inspection period, which is kind of your back out time if something goes wrong, or maybe ask the seller to fix something. So the process in this case is just a little different, it sounds like.
Absolutely. So when you're buying a home that is bank owned, typically when you submit an offer, you'll hear back in 3 to 5 days as opposed to, on resales, 24 or 48 hours. And when you hear back, once you get mutual acceptance, that will typically be verbal. And that's the point when all of the timelines begin. Since it's the job of your agent to start managing those timelines, your 10-day inspection contingency, those sorts of things, it's beneficial to have an agent who's worked with buyer representation on REOs because they know that you need to start working on getting that inspection done. And there's a few things that need to happen. A lot of bank-owned properties have been winterized, so your agent will need to take care of getting the power and water turned back on before you can even have an inspection done. So making sure that you can get all of that done within that 10-day timeline, sometimes when you don't even have seller signed contracts back.
And the verbal works? I mean, you can just have a verbal. I was always under the impression that a real estate contract couldn't be verbal.
No, actually, a lot of the banks are instructing people to start with their timelines prior to actually receiving the documents, just because it's taking them so long to get them back.
So it's almost an element of, okay, we're good, get started.
Yep. Yeah.
Does that put the buyer on the hook, though, at some point? I mean, what if, are the verbals pretty strong, I guess?
They are. And obviously
You're not talking to the teller who's like, yeah, we'll totally do it. There's actually somebody higher ranking, I guess. Not that tellers are low ranking, but they're not making the decisions.
But typically you would have an email to back that up as well.
Got it, okay.
Something in writing. But
that makes more sense. I'm thinking, yeah, we're going to get it. And I could only imagine I've seen so many real estate deals where you think you're going to get it, and then all of a sudden, oh, yeah, we needed to change a few things. So, just trying to protect some people out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about, in the mortgage world, we're here with Ann Casey with Miller Laine Properties, and Ann, we just have a couple of minutes left before we have to go to break. But I want to just get into, you talked about the bank won't pay for any fixing the property at all. They also won't pay any fees, will they?
It's going to depend on the bank, but with a lot of the banks, they won't pay transfer tax. And what that means is excise tax. Since we don't have property tax in Washington State, we pay excise tax on the transfer of properties. In King County, that's 1.78%. So unless you're working with an agent who knows to clarify in the original offer that the seller is responsible for transfer taxes and fees, you could end up coming to the table not knowing that you need to bring in an extra $6,000 to close.
That would be a bummer.
Exactly.
So you end up actually making sure in the contract it's disclosed who's going to pay. Taxes that are almost always paid for by the seller in around here.
Absolutely. In fact, I think it's stipulated in Washington law that those are paid for by the seller unless a bank has it in the bank addendum. And since every bank has their own bank addendum, you need to make sure that it's clarified in the contract.
Well, another reason to read the fine print, huh?
Exactly.
Well, Ann, thanks so much for joining us. Real quick, so with customer service, your business, what are some of those key items that you really focus on for people when they're looking at bank-owned properties?
Well, obviously when they're looking at any property, we're trying to find something that meets all of their needs. It's great if we can find them bank-owned properties that give them that great return on investment or have a built-in equity. But ultimately, it's finding the properties that meet their needs regardless of who the seller is.
Good. I like that. It is. And it comes to meeting their needs, understanding, I talked about the other day. Everybody says, I want a good deal. Nobody ever says, I want a bad deal. But sometimes people have to realize that just because you're getting the right price doesn't always make it a good deal for them if they're not getting the right house. And thanks so much for joining us. Hey, stay tuned. When we come back, if you own investment properties and you want to get more cash flow for them on a yearly basis, you are not gonna want to miss Jonathan Frizzell, who's going to let you know some ways to not only make more money on your property, but you're going to make it through a very, very, I don't know how easy it is. He'll let you know, but he's going to let you know how to do it when we come back. My name is Ben Brash, and that's Ann Casey. You're listening to Brashenomics.